Good morning. Welcome to our traffic safety webinar. We'll be starting up here in a couple of minutes. We're starting up here in about another minute or so. You want to go ahead and open up your Q&A pod and your chat pod. Talk about that in a minute. We'll get started here in just a little bit. Okay, it's the top of the hour. We're going to give folks about 30 seconds to finish logging in. And we will get started here in just a minute. Okay. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on traffic safety. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the Cornell Local Roads Program. We're your New York State LTAP Center. And I'm doing this from New York City, so hopefully the bandwidth won't be an issue for us. I'm down here for the New York Association of Towns meeting. Going to talk this afternoon, so it should be a little bit fun. And if you're wondering in the Q&A, we're doing okay. Now, if you haven't been on one of these before, lower left corner is where you can check out your volume and stuff like audio and stuff like that. Again, we'd ask you to open up your chat pod and your Q&A pod. The chat pod is really a one way for us to send you information, such as the link to the handout for the day, which has a bunch of resources you might want to look at later on, and the Q&A so that you can send us questions, and I'll look at those questions as we go through. If you've got one, just go ahead and answer it. And if I don't answer it, it's just because it's something about volume or something like that, you can check with Amanda and Jody in the background. They'll take care of that. And I may ask you to raise your hands too, so just be ready for that. In terms of what we're working on, we have a whole bunch of online stuff coming up. We've got the rest of the month of webinars that seem to be safety focused by just random chance. We've added a couple of webinars, and the recordings, by the way, are available on local road safety funds and roadway departures. In March, we'll be doing snow and ice, which you're going to wait to the end of the season. But again, we want to sort of think about getting ready actually even for next year now. It may actually be a good time to think about that. And then we'll finish up our webinar series with pavement maintenance on March 10th. We are doing a special workshop, online workshop for 4 hours on Thursday on Federal Aid 101. If you've gotten federal projects, you might want to look at that. If you haven't, you definitely want to look at that if you're interested in. There are funds available both for safety funds and the Transportation Alternatives Program. There's a call for funds out right now. We'll talk more about that and other sources of funds next week. We'll then be switching into our workshop season. And so look for that and we'll go from there. Now, this is a course that's worth a professional development hour here in New York State for engineering continuing education. Only the person registered gets it. If you had wanted to watch this as a group, and I know at least one place is watching as a group, we can work those details out, but especially for plain registration. But for PDHs, you need to be the person who's registered. It is counted as a course, though that's not as critical as it used to be. And if you're from another state, well, you'll need to check with your LTAP center in that state or TTAP center. Now, we're going to do a welcome. We're going to do a couple of polls and make sure again you have your chat pad open because the links to the polls will be popped into the chat box. You don't have to type www.pollev.com/DavidOrP. You can just click on the link in the chat pod, or you can type that in because this helps me figure out who and on the call and where you're from. So first, just why are we doing traffic safety before we do the polls? Well, you've probably seen this video posted by the DOT last year. Essentially, somebody was getting ready to set up a work zone and somebody ran off the road and crashed. Luckily, nobody was injured, though there was a bit of a fright. We want everybody to get home safely every single day. That's the goal. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through our course of our day together. Oh no, I got a logout thing here. Well, it was working earlier. We're gonna take just a second, so I'm gonna stop my share. I'm gonna take just a second to log in real quick. Uh, of course, this shouldn't take too long. I won't take too much of your time. If not, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. The technology, isn't it great? Give it about 30 seconds. So we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. Apologize for this. I'm wondering if it's Poly V because it won't let me log in. So I apologize for that. We're going to do this the old-fashioned way. I know old-fashioned on the web. That sounds sort of a bit strange, but that's just the way it's going to be. And so we're going to wind up in a situation you're going to see a screen that says uh, that we're currently logged out when we get to that particular thing. And I apologize for that, but there's nothing I can do about it. Don't ask me why it's doing that. And I won't take your time up. So what we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. Let me pull the pods back up here real quick.
You want to share your screen again?
What we got, Amanda?
Um,
Yep, I'm going to share it here. I'm just getting it back. Okay, and then let me pull up the Q&A pod. So I'm just going to have to make some assumptions about who is here. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions to raise your hands in a sec. Can you see it now, Amanda? Do you see the screen?
the screen.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so again, I'm just going to make some assumptions about who is here. We're going to do the questions and the polls. If you see that screen come up, we're going to do that via the Q&A. We'll still be okay. We'll still move out. It's not a problem. Technology is winning today. So do me a favor. Um, Raise your hand if you're an engineer. Just raise your hand. I just want to see how many of you are engineers on the call. Get a sense. I'm guessing it's more than half. Okay. Okay, it's about what I expected. Okay, actually, it's a little less than half. Cool. Okay. So now we're going to lower everybody's hands. I'm going to ask you one more time a different question. How many of you live below the line if you come straight across the southern part of the southern tier? In other words, you're in Rockland County, Long Island, New York City, uh, Putnam County, Westchester County. In other words, what most of us would think of as pseudo downstate. I'm not going to define the line. Don't get me wrong. I'm not that crazy. I'm not, again, okay, just getting a sense. Okay. Okay. That gives me a quick sense. And then last question, how many of you are highway officials? Superintendent, commissioner, deputy, something like that, things like that. Okay, just okay. Okay, cool. Okay, and then Amanda and Jody will lower your hands. We're going to move on. A lot of the stuff we're talking about today comes from our solution for safer roads and streets, but some of it comes from other resources, and they're available in the handout if you open up the chat pod. Okay, so now we're talking about accidents and crashes. Okay. The term we use these days is a crash. Just as a reminder, that's really because we want to focus first on making sure it doesn't happen again and not worry so much about exactly who's to blame. Now, I do have an old picture. I need to update this picture, and I know exactly how I should update it, Amanda. I apologize. I should really be using CC instead. But we know when little ones have accidents, we know where the issue is. But with a crash, we really want to focus on solving it so it doesn't happen again. So if I say the word accident, that's just, I'm saying crash. It's just something that we're getting used to. Okay. Now, when it comes to crashes versus accidents and things like that, we're dealing with the probability of it occurring. We're dealing with the severity of the crash. We really want to get rid of the high severity crashes, the ones that cause people to die or to get seriously injured. And exposure is something. Now, we use the term exposure. Let's talk about these three things. Probability, how probable is it? What's the probability people are actually using this security gate? If you got a sharp curve after a long straightaway, there's a higher probability of a crash because people have gotten out of the habit of taking the curves versus a winding road where people are probably more ready for the curve. So think about probability of a crash occurring. Think about the severity of the crash. If you've seen many of these webinars, you've seen this set of pictures, the luckiest man in Nevada, who looked like he had a bad day, but he had a really good day because he could have gone over that cliff. That would have been obviously a really super high severity rather than a relatively low one. And then, of course, exposure, we call it exposure. What we really mean is traffic. And that exposure might be pedestrians and bicyclists, it might be cars, it might be buses, but essentially the volume. Most of us might think about doing the roadway on the right first because it's more severe, but the traffic volume is under 100 versus the one on the left, where the traffic volume is several thousand a day. Both are going to be severe crashes if somebody goes off. So the key is a combination of probability, exposure, and of course, severity. Now, again, you can't do a poll, so we're just going to skip the polls and we'll talk about fatalities. And when you see the polls, I may ask you to do something in the Q&A, so just keep that in mind. Now, in terms of fatalities in the United States, the real problem is the fatalities jumped after COVID. I mean, there was a lot more fatalities after COVID than beforehand. We were getting close to 30,000 people a year that were killed on our roads in the United States, which is still way too high. We really would like to get towards zero, but we were getting better. And then things changed. We're over 40,000 these days. Now, there's some evidence that we may be starting to come back down, but people got in bad habits. They went faster, they were a little more aggressive. We really need to overcome some of those issues. So keep that in mind. It's not just a New York problem, it's a nationwide problem. How do we do better in terms of fatalities? Now, FHWA likes to focus on three crash focus areas because these are the three most common reasons why people crash. They leave the roadway or the lane. We call that a roadway departure. In fact, that's what the special webinars that I talked about earlier are. We're doing special webinars because roadway departures is the highest issue. Then intersections. A lot of crashes at intersections are dangerous, especially with pedestrians and bicyclists. And of course, pedestrians and bicyclists in of themselves is an issue to think about. So these are the three crash focus areas. The gentleman in this video is only going to get a broken arm. But imagine how easily that could have been a fatality or a severe crash, even beyond what was already there. And of course, for that gentleman and even the person in the car, it's a severe crash. Now, they were walking against the do not walk signal. Somebody went through a red light. Two wrongs shouldn't cause somebody to lose their life, even three. But in this particular case, luckily, just with the grace of fortune, we were able to not have a fatality. So obviously we have a combination of an intersection and a pedestrian issue here. And when it comes to crash factors, you've probably seen versions of this chart as a Venn diagram. I do it as a pie chart, but the idea is we like to say that 93% of the time there's a human factor. Now, my problem is And the reason that I want to be careful here is, yes, 93% of the time there's a human factor. People were going too fast, people were not paying attention, they were on their cell phone. But that doesn't mean there aren't things we can do, even for the crashes, which are pretty much just human factors. And we obviously can do something about the vehicles. We obviously can do something about the highway, which is well over a third of the crashes. But we can even do things about the human factors if we just think about what humans are doing and try to set things up so that one mistake doesn't lead to a fatal or serious crash. So keep that in mind. Now, in terms of the vehicle itself, what can we do? Well, one of the reasons we have inspections, one of the reasons we have standards is to make cars safer. Now, the one on the left is obviously the Ford Pinto, which had a notorious habit of if it got hit just right, the tank could explode in the gas tank. That's not good. And then, of course, the one on the right is the Corvair, which Ralph Nader, not Robert, Ralph Nader called unsafe at any speed. We've got pretty safe cars. The cars are about as safe as they've ever been, but they're still working on improving them. But it doesn't matter how good the vehicle is if it's not maintained well. And these tires just might be a little bit beyond their safety life. Okay? And we've all seen vehicles, maybe not this extreme, but we've seen vehicles that really could be better. And so there's standards out there. The reason we're spending money to try to have Waymo and Google and all these vehicles that drive themselves is to take the human factor out, but they, of course, have their own issues. But we're working on making the vehicles better. But it's a relatively small percentage of the pie. In terms of the human factors, and yes, I'll come back to highway in just a minute. The human factors, well, again, think about what humans are thinking about. What's their expectation? What's their attention? What's their vision? And there's a cartoon that looks funny, and we laugh about the people staring at their phone, but there's an actual sign out there in Belgium, if I remember correctly, where they put up a sign to warn drivers that people are maybe not paying attention. But remember, perception is reality. I mean, we've all seen somebody on their phone focus so much on their phone they don't even realize where they are. You have to worry about that in college campuses, I can tell you right now. And I saw a bunch down here in New York City, people literally on their phone, not paying attention to where they're walking. So let's don't break people's expectations. So in the Q&A, do me a favor, somebody in the Q&A, I know you've probably seen this before. What's the most important sign in this cluster of signs? And there's way too many signs here, but that's a different problem. hmm Right off the bat, somebody sees it. Yeah, it's the hospital sign. When I took this picture, this is in Lake Placid, that sign was perfectly legal. It was allowed in the New York State supplement to the MUTCD that in the Adirondacks, information signs could be yellow on brown. And they still can be for most signs, but the hospital sign now has to be white on blue. Okay, that is required because that sign is too important to do something that breaks people's expectations. We can't do that to people. There's one right there. Hopefully everybody caught it. Your brain said school, but that's not school. It's actually the shakul. Okay. Again, I'm not actually sure if this is real or fake. It's old enough that it would have been a little harder to do. My gut instinct it's real, but I've found some that we've got in our pool that are actually fake. But whatever, don't break people's expectations because we all think certain things when we see them. Okay? So let's not do that. And then, of course, we have the awareness test. Now, I'm being brave. We're going to see if the internet bandwidth is enough. I want you to count how many passes does the team in white make. So count the number of passes the team in white makes. Okay? Let's see if everybody does a good job. And did everybody count the number of passes? Did you get the answer of 13? If you did, be happy. You can raise your hand or not. Either way, yeah, 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear? Okay, watch carefully. We'll do it again. And here's the challenge. It's a real world problem. There's the bear. Once you see the bear, you can never unsee the bear. But It's really easy to miss something if you're not looking for it. And this is a known problem. Okay. So, and yes, there's a version of this with a gorilla as well. So raise your hand if you, on a regular basis, ride a motorcycle or a bicycle. Raise your hand. Okay. Quite a few of you do on a regular basis. Okay. The reality is, when we're driving, we expect cars and trucks and maybe buses. We're not looking for pedestrians. We're not looking for bicyclists. We're not looking for motorcycles. We know that's an issue. And so people aren't always paying attention and looking for those things. And if they're distracted in the slightest, like trying to count the number of tosses of a basketball or answering that text, it can lead to an attention problem. And yes, that is a human factor, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can't do something about it. Try to put people in situations where they don't create a safety issue. So keep that in mind as we talk about the highway safety function, okay? And then, of course, we have to deal with the fact that there's vision and hearing and sound and all of the senses that come into play. If your brain says this is moving, it's just the nature of your brain. If you stare at one dot, especially in an upper or lower corner, you'll actually see the thing is perfectly still. I've got the couple of pods open because I'm on a single screen. The illusion doesn't work right now, but the brain can be fooled pretty easily. And so you have to deal with that reality. And of course, vision changes as we get older. So keep these things in mind. So what can we do on the highway? I'm going to focus on highway issues, but I also want to think about those human factors as we go through traffic safety. Now, there's certainly geometry and traffic control issues that we can deal with. Okay, whether it's a low volume road or high volume road, there's certainly things we can do. Um, Intersections is, of course, a major place that we have to deal with these kind of issues. Absolutely a critical issue coming into play at an intersection. This is a little mini roundabout in Ithaca, New York. Um, if it's low volume, these can be very effective. Again, you're getting people to have to think a little bit and slow down, divert them a little bit from their focus down the roadway. We take the geometry of the roadways, we super elevate it. Okay. This is over near the Hudson in the Bear Mountain area. Um, it's actually a fun road to drive if you're paying attention. But you can see, if you look carefully, it's not too hard to see where there's been a few folks who've skidded a little bit, haven't always gotten the width that they need. But we can only super elevate so much. We can only do so much to the geometry, but we should do what we can where we can. And of course, intersections lead us to all kinds of fun problems. Um, this is a good example of three roads coming together and they put in a big Y intersection. And we've all seen those Y intersections. Who has the right of way? Who goes first? And how do you make these things safer? Can be a bit of a challenge. And yet at the same time, you want the capacity that you can deal with. Now, again, if we had a whole day, we would spend a whole day on this. And then one that we don't always think about, but actually is a pretty important issue from a safety and uh, capacity issue is vertical alignment. Now, this particular road has a grade at one point, about the halfway up that second part there, of 18%. Okay, pretty steep. In fact, the buggy that's there is going to have a hard struggle a lot when they get up past the driveway. You can see where the mailbox is there. This particular road used to be seasonal, and it is now a year-round roadway because that mailbox that you see got built, a house did, and now it's a school bus stop or was a school bus stop. Vertical alignment creates issues for us. People tend to go faster downhill, they have a hard time going up the hill, and they're focused on a different issue. So think about the speed they could build up coming down that hill. Okay. So keep these things in mind. And of course, where they combine together, where having people do two things at once can lead to an issue. We know that as you come around a corner, especially if you're going over a knoll, you can actually get into a visual trap and not actually know what the roadway is doing. So that's why it's so important to have good signs. It's so important to have the right lane width and the good markings. And we don't call those highway problems. If someone runs off the road here, we would actually call that just a human factors issue because it's quote unquote signed. But if we think about how people behave, we can actually do a better job with our alignments. Now, The criterion for the stopping sight distance. We talked about this. If you've all taken a highway engineering class, you've seen this. And the idea is we want to be able to drive down the road in our car. It's about 3.5 feet is what we assume. Okay. And we want to stop before we hit an object that is 2 feet, i.e. the bumper of another vehicle. At one time, it used to be as down as low as 6 inches, but we started realizing really that's probably a little bit too conservative. So it's 3.5, 2 feet. Can you see down the roadway and stop the vehicle in time? And if you can, great. Okay. But can't always do that, especially on low volume, older roadways, which we have a lot of here in New York State. And so you don't always have that stopping sight distance. And of course, if there's distractions, there may be additional distances involved. Just want to keep that in mind. When you're designing a roadway, think about what people can see. Okay, and I apologize if the sound is echoing. Again, I don't know what the bandwidth is doing. Maybe I'll have Amanda hide my video. We'll see if that helps. Now, when I was in school, I learned something called the 4 E's. How many of you learned the 4 E's when you were in school? Raise your hand. Tell me how many of you learned the 4 E's. 3 E's, maybe. I actually learned 3 E's in college. And the idea behind that was pretty cool. We could educate people, including the highway community and the driver. We could do engineering where we get rid of fixed objects like that lovely mailbox on the upper right. We could enforce speeds and get people to slow down. And then, of course, the emergency response is a major safety issue that we can deal with. The problem is over time, people got in the habit of siloing these things. So we'd educate people and we'd go, well, we're done. We educated them. They're safe now. Or we do the engineering, we put in a 30-foot clear zone, have no culture at all, and we say, well, we did our engineering best, but we really didn't have a roadway that had any aesthetics and wasn't really as safe as we thought it could be. And of course, enforcement was kept separate. We only enforced places where, well, maybe people were speeding. Maybe it wasn't even a safety issue, but we caught them speeding. There's not always a correlation between those two. So keep these things in mind. And of course, the emergency response, the golden hour, we know that makes a difference, but we again siloed these things. Now, we have geometric standards. So all of these things come together into geometric standards. That's where the Astro Green Book comes from. And by the way, if you're wondering, the Astro Green Book, everybody goes, "Oh, the Astro Green Book, that's important." Well, no, the Green Book's color isn't anything important. It came from the fact that there used to be an Astro Yellow Book for rural areas and Blue Book for urban areas, and they decided to combine them together. And they created a Green Book. That's all it is. So the Green Book is green because of its history. New York State's Highway Design Manual pretty much follows the Astro Green Book with some minor modifications for the fact that we have slightly colder weather and more snow. There is an Astro low volume book that's available. It was put out last in 2019. I actually like this. We actually produced some standards on our website. They're linked in the handout, and they use the Astro low volume book as a starting point. And the reality is the Astro low volume standards, which go up to 2,000 vehicles a day, actually pulls a lot of information from a set of standards developed here in New York State back in the first Cuomo administration, back in the 90s. Okay. So standards are critical. So let me ask, everybody can raise your hand if, even if you're a consulting firm, do you have right now a set of standards that you would go to that says, yep, these are the standards I'm going to use? Raise your hand if you've got a set of standards that would be the ones you would use. Okay. Everybody should raise your hand, truth be told. If you're not, then we have an issue because you need to have a set of standards. You can't have something to work against if you don't have a set of standards. You may have to have two different standards. If you're with a county, for instance, and you got roads that are under 2,000 vehicles a day, you could adopt the low volume standards and then have just some minor modifications for your own system. And then for the roads above 2,000, you could adopt the New York State Highway Design Manual. And that would protect you in court, which is another reason we want to have good geometric standards. If you don't have adopted standards, someone else may hold you to those standards. If you're a consulting engineer, you need to know where to start in terms of checking design, in terms of checking whether or not you meet the standards that are available. So let's take all of this information, And let's think about that. And again, human factors, highway design, and let's talk about traffic safety. This is a quote that used to be on the door of our person who's with today we call our program manager, Amanda's position. If you do what you've always done, you will get what you've always got. Okay? And the idea behind this is we get in habits. We all sort of think about, well, that's what I learned in school, or that's what we've always got. Well, let's think about how we can improve things and make things a little bit better. Now, why is speed one of the first things we look at? Well, speed and pedestrians don't go together very well. There's studies that have been done, and these numbers do change a little bit depending on the study that you look at, but they're close. Essentially, at a low speed, about 25 miles an hour, which is the lowest state speed limit you can put in right now, unless it's a school zone. If you're a pedestrian and you get struck by a car, your chances of walking away with an injury that is not life-changing or getting killed is about two-thirds of the time. And that's for an adult, by the way. Kids are more vulnerable, older people are more vulnerable. But you still got a pretty high chance of getting killed. By the time you get up to 40 miles an hour, slightly over, according to the standard I'm showing you the data from, it's about a 50-50 shot that you're going to get killed. And about another almost, not quite 40, a little under 40% chance that you're going to have a serious injury, the kind of injury that changes lives, permanent concussion, loss of a limb, something that you're going to have to change your entire life habit. Only about 12% of the time do you walk away with just a minor injury, like that broken arm in the video we saw earlier. It's still not a good day. And of course, by the time you get up to 58, just over the state speed limit, in other words, the speed most people are actually driving, your chances of walking away are pretty much nil. So speed is one of the things we need to think about. It's not so much the speed by itself, because the interstate system actually has some of the highest speeds, but the lowest crash rates, especially fatals and high severity, because the differential speeds, we've got good clear zones. We do a little bit more in terms of the engineering. So really, it's not speed is the issue. It's differential speed that we want to be thinking about. Okay? So go back to our crash factors and just think about what can we do to make the human factor problem reduced and what can we do with the highway. And there's more than you might think that's available. Okay. Now, again, I can't do a poll, so we're going to skip this poll for now. And we're just going to talk a little bit about, go back to that safe stopping distance. Okay. So in terms of that state safe stopping distance, it's still 3.5 feet. Okay. It's still going to be all the same. But what they've said is, we can actually do better than that. Let's do a little bit better than that. And so the latest version of the Astro Green Book, they've added something called the decision sight distance. And what that says is, in an urban area especially, you might want to think about maybe just doing a little bit more time. Give people a little bit more time to make the decision. In the Q&A, tell me how much time do you think it takes for most people to react to something that's unknown? Just put in the Q&A what you think that time is. 2 seconds. Okay, I'm seeing 2 seconds, 2.5, 3, 2.5, 1.5, 3. It turns out most of us actually, surprisingly, can react to something that's unexpected in about 1 to 2 seconds. So we'll say 1.5. But we design roadways around the idea of 2.5 seconds because we want to get a little higher percentage. Sometimes you've heard the 85th percentile. So we design around 2.5 seconds. But what we've realized is with the distractions in an urban area especially, let's give them a little bit more time. So we've increased the decision sight distance, the time it takes to put your foot on the brake. And that actually turns out to be pretty important. Okay? So keep that in mind. And those four E's that got siloed, well, we've realized that's also an issue that we have to think about. So this is a figure from the FHWA. Um, it's called the Safe System Approach. And the idea is we're going to take all of these things we've talked about before, and we're going to look at them holistically, combined. Okay? And it's got text around the side, things such as responsibility is shared and one injury shouldn't lead to a death, things like that. But the reality is, it's a little complicated. So I made my own version. I simplified it a little bit. And the idea is we still have these areas we focus on, but we don't want to just look at one. We want to look at all of them at once. And the goal is simple. The goal is to get towards zero deaths. Now, I don't believe we'll get to zero deaths. That doesn't mean that's not my goal. My goal is to get to zero deaths. And the only way you can do that is by thinking about things combined. So we're still going to have safe road users, but we don't just stop with some training. We think about providing information as part of the highway. We think about training people that are drivers, the crews, everybody. And we don't stop that training at any point. We think about safer roads, better engineering, but how does that match with human factors? Can we do things to make the roadway safer, even if it quote unquote meets the standard? And of course, safe speeds. A well-designed roadway, people actually drive at a safe speed. What's a safe speed? What depends on the road. On the interstate system, that could be 60, 65, even 70 miles an hour if it's designed for it. People tend to drive their speeds based upon what they see. If we get a road that's too wide, people go too fast. All the enforcement in the world isn't going to necessarily solve that problem. And of course, we're going to have the emergency response as still part of the equation. That's very important. And we're going to continue to work on the vehicles. But we're going to do this together. We're not going to have one versus another. We're really going to look at everything together. And what that means is we're going to get redundancy. So that means that even if we've got somebody who's just going too fast, even if we get somebody who is just absolutely out of their mind, and they got a vehicle that's a little unsafe, well, maybe the roadway protects them. Maybe we have to do post-crash care at the worst case scenario, but the idea is that's the last step in the chain. It's called the Swiss cheese model, if you're wondering. If you think about a bunch of pieces of Swiss cheese and you randomly stack them, all the holes have to line up before someone gets seriously crashed or seriously injured, or in the case of the cheese itself, there's a hole all the way through. Okay? Now, this is a video from Ohio. The person here was going over 100 miles an hour. They went off the roadway. The rail system launched them into the air. Um, they were seriously injured. This was definitely not a walk-away crash. But because there happened to be a trooper, whose video feed you're seeing was right there, they actually survived. But again, could we have made this safer? Yeah, there's things we could have done with the rail system, and they did update things. Can you solve every problem? No. But the idea is we can do what we can where we can. So let's go back and look at those geometric standards that we talked about. Okay? And we have those standards that are available to you. Think about adopting standards that make things better. But then don't get hung up on the standards. And this is the real point I really want you to walk away with in terms of standards. Just because somebody meets the standard doesn't mean you're done. Risk doesn't disappear because you meet the standard. Let's say the standards say that you need to have a 12-foot lane. Well, it doesn't mean, if you look at the risk, that the crash risk goes from pretty high, all of a sudden drops really low because we go from a 10-foot lane to a 12-foot lane. That's called nominal safety. And if we design around that concept, we don't actually get the level of safety increase that we really want. The real idea is something called substantive safety. Everything we can do that increases safety or reduces risk is a incremental idea. It doesn't suddenly drop. So we set a standard to try to be as safe as we can, knowing there's an economic driver as well. But we want to make sure we don't go crazy and stop. Oh, I'm 12 feet, I'm good. It also means that if we can't get the standard, let's say that you can only get 11 feet without having to buy right of way, and there's just no political will to buy the right of way, that's okay. It's really okay to think about things from the standpoint of improve what you can, where you can, and then document what you did and why you did it. And going wider and wider and wider, it turns out, and we'll see if my pen decides to work today. least see if the pin works. Hey, the pin looks like it's working. If we actually looked at it from a risk standpoint, there are times when the risk can actually start to go back up. If we make the lane too wide, people go faster and the risk actually starts to increase. There may be a low spot that we look at. Okay. So don't get hung up on the standards having to be followed precisely, but use the standards as a tool to get us started. So I'm going to bring up systemic safety. We talked about it in last week's webinar. We'll talk about it in the webinar a week from Thursday when we talk about local road safety plans. It's something we really need to focus on, and that is a risk-based approach to improving safety. So here are fatal crashes occurred in the southern tier in a 3-year period, 2012 to 2014. And I'm going to raise the dots so you can see them. Here we go. And if you've seen this slide before, you realize that none of these crashes are close to each other. Okay. Now, if we were to add serious crashes, we may find a few hotspots. But for the most part, we know where the hotspots are, or we can analyze for them. And the state has done that as part of the roadway departure safety action plan for roadway departures. But the reality is, a lot of the places aren't really hotspots. What's happening is a random nature to crashes that occurs. But the cool thing about systemic safety is we can focus on the critical locations before a crash occurs, which is really pretty neat. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by focusing on the overrepresented crashes. In the case of fatal crashes, overturning vehicles, vehicles that run into each other, opposite crashes, or hitting a fixed object, that's where we want to spend our money. And so if you were to spend in a rural area, you're probably not going to have as many overturns and oppositions. You're going to have a lot of fixed objects because it's probably a narrow clear zone. And what's the most dangerous? Well, it's a tree. Trees are by far the most dangerous fixed object. In fact, if we look at just the fixed object crashes, notice that trees, 90% of all fatals, okay, due to roadway departure, and not quite half, a little over a third, actually not quite half, about 30 something percent, maybe 40% of the crashes occur because somebody hit a tree. And we know trees are really, really dangerous. 45, hey, I even put the number in there for myself. I should have, can't see my next slide there. Got to be risky here. Now, these are simulated tree views from above. Just watch the what happens when you hit it. Again, 30 miles an hour approximately, 43 miles an hour. Oh, I went too far. 43 miles an hour, and of course, 55 miles an hour. And if you were driving a car and you hit a big tree, your chances of walking away get pretty slim by the time you're at 55 miles an hour. In fact, it's likely you're going to be lucky if the only thing you get is a loss of limb because you're into the passenger vehicle. Now, how big does a vehicle tree have to be a fixed object? Well, it turns out not as thick as you think. Even a 4-inch tree can be a deadly fixed object. So keep that in mind when we're trying to improve safety. Okay. Now, in terms of fatal crashes, rural areas tend to have a higher percentage of tree crashes because you'd expect there's more trees near the roadway. Okay. People in cars tend to be a little bit higher risk, as you might expect. But some things are a little bit surprising. So, for instance, the posted speed, whether it's above or below 45 miles an hour, that's what those two columns are. Turns out it's not as big of a deal as you might think. The posted speed is not necessarily the only factor because it's a human factor problem. So where the trees are is something that you need to think about. Okay? So again, my poll's not going to come up. I know that. So do me a favor. We'll talk about clear zones in a sec, but in the Q&A, tell me what can we do about tree safety? Tell me what we can do about tree safety in the Q&A. You could do some trimming. Yep. You could remove the trees from the right of way, maybe even beyond the right of way. We'll talk about that when we talk about the clear zone here in a second. You can cut back the trees, remove them, prune them. You might need to think about rail, but rail in itself is an issue. In fact, we're going to talk about rail in just a minute. Again, cut them down, but we don't want to get rid of every single tree. And what is a good clear zone? Well, we'll talk about that in just a second. But the key is to be consistent. More than anything else, a consistent clear zone turns out to be one of the most important things. And think about where trees are more likely to get struck. If you're on a straightaway like we've got in this picture here, is it likely someone's going to hit a tree? Probably not. How about the outside of a corner? Or even maybe the inside of a corner? So think about where people are running off the roadway. Put your efforts and your times there. Okay? So that's something to think about. Now, in terms of clear zone itself, um, make sure I get the right question that I wanted to have you guys do. Okay? Now, in this particular case, I wish I could do this one. I can't. Um, I can't have you mark the edge of the clear zone in this particular case. The picture just isn't going to show up. But what would be a reasonable clear zone? So you tell me, what's a reasonable clear zone? Put it in the Q&A. What's a reasonable clear zone? 15 feet off the edge of the pavements? 30 feet? 15, 20? Depends on the speed. Ooh, I like that one. That's a really good answer. Depends on the speed, depends on the slope, depends upon even the type of roadway. Is it a rural roadway? Is it agricultural along the side? Is it a connecting road? There's a whole bunch of factors. That's where those standards can help us as a starting point more than anything else. Those AASHTO low volume standards, they've done risk analysis. And get talking under 400 vehicles a day, heck, 6 feet is probably all you need. 6 to 10 is what they recommend for most low volume roadways. But a consistent clear zone is more critical than any other thing that you can think about. Okay? So keep that in mind with what the clear zone is. And of course, in New York State, the right of way is what's been used or maintained by the agency on most roads. So the right of way in this case may actually only be, let's see if this is a good color. Oh, that's a lousy color. Let's pick a better color. The right of way may actually only be defined by this first tree right here. Right here. And my pen color didn't like me. Let's try that again. There we go. Might be defined by that tree right there. Okay. So if you had a tree that grew up close to the roadway, the right of way may actually change. And we talk about that in a legal class if we need to. Now, in terms of what we put in the roadway, whether they're signs or whether they're rail systems, we really want to make sure things are breakaway. There's actually standards for that. There's requirements for that on certain types of roadways. This is just a simple pipe post. A lot of people wouldn't even think of it as a fixed object, and yet it caused that small car to have a very serious crash. We want to have breakaway hardware wherever possible. Okay? Breakaway signage works, and it's actually relatively expensive. This is a breakaway test with just one of those little bolts that cost like $2. Okay. Now, in a rural area where the sign can fly, that's probably all you need. But in an urban area, maybe you need one of the strapping systems. That's now going to cost you $20 or so. But make sure the signs can handle the breakaway that's on them. So easy, simple, and should become a standard. Make sure you repair your edge drop-offs and widen the inside of your curves. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands because I know in a couple of things I'm going to have a lovely poll again for you. Um, but let me just ask you, how many of you have curve radius that you work on if you're a consultant or your agency has that are under 1,000 feet in radius? Raise your hand if you've got a curve that's under 1,000 feet in radius. Okay. So 30 or so of you have raised your hands. Okay. Now, I'm going to lower everybody's hand. Going to ask you the same question with a small caveat. How many of you widen the pavement on the inside of that curve? About 30 of you raised your hands, and about half of those folks raised their hands again. Okay, so now everybody gets to answer this one. How many people realize that the Green Book, the Astro Green Book, and the New York State Highway Design Manual, for most curves under about, it depends on how the speed and the lane width, but most curves, especially as you start getting under 1,000-foot radius, actually require that you widen the inside of the curve according to the standard. Yeah, everybody should have raised your hand. By the time you get down to a 500-foot radius, it might be as many as 2 or 3 feet width on the inside of curves. It's in the standard already, and yet we don't always do that. And certainly you see a lot of times when people forget about it because we're so used to big wide radius. But you get on a low volume road, can make a huge difference. The West Virginia Department of Transportation, in a state that, by the way, in West Virginia, the state DOT maintains almost every single roadway that's not in an urban area. There's 5 states that occurs. They found that they were having problems with people running off the road. And so they would widen the inside of the curves, and it improved safety by a lot. They started systemically, places where they'd had crashes or similar geometric areas, and eventually it became the standard operating procedure. And they went right back and essentially followed the standards plus a little bit extra because, again, the standard's a minimum, not the starting point or the ending point. Okay? Now, some people said we should put up rail to protect the trees. And I'm not opposed to rail. And by the way, in New York State, Connecticut, New Jersey, we call it guide rail. In most other states, it's guardrail. It's the same stuff. Rail works in a particular way. Now, again, I can't do the poll, and there's a whole series of polls that I could do. And I don't think this video is going to show today. It was fighting me earlier. But rail systems do improve things. But rail in of itself is not the only answer that you can put up. In fact, it should be the next to last step in our process. First, eliminate the hazard. First, make it traversable, make it breakaway. Then and only then do you think about rail systems. Heck, on a low volume road, I'd even think about doing delineation. Okay? And yeah, I see someone in the thing here. Curved interchange wraps often need widening. In terms of that rail being too high, this particular case, I've actually got other pictures I could show you. The rail was not actually too high. The end section wasn't properly installed. And again, I don't know if it was design standard or if it was the way it was installed, but this particular rail system speared the vehicle. It came in and hit the end. That should not happen. Ends of rail systems need to be designed to be hit. Okay. Now, we're going to ask a few questions for our PDHs. You're going to get a whole bunch of things here. So what I'm going to do, let me get a slide on here that I think isn't going to drive everybody nuts. Let's go with, tell you what, let's just do it this way. I'm going to show you the last slide. We are not done. Okay. We are not done. Got some PDH questions, but my poll everywhere and I are fighting each other. So in the Q&A for me. Okay, you ready? What is the name of the new FHWA approach to improving traffic safety? What's the name of the FHWA approach to improving traffic safety? We got safe systems, safe system approach. Yeah, very good. Yeah, okay, okay. Someone put the word vision zero. Vision zero is a concept that we try to get towards zero crashes. It's part of the idea of safe systems, and a lot of communities, including here in New York City, where I'm sitting, have adopted the idea of the vision zero approach. That's our goal, that we'd like everybody to get home every single day. But the real key with the safe systems, and the reason why we're fans of it, is we want to look at everything combined. Okay? We want to look at the road. We want to look at the user. We want to look at everything combined. Okay? Now, let me find that slide here. We'll put that one up here instead. Do, do, do. We've talked about crash factors, and again, if we had more time, we could really get into this. People will say, "Oh, I can't do anything about those crashes that are only human factors." Do me a favor, in the Q&A, give me an example of something you think we could do that would actually reduce the human factors problem. That's not a highway issue or a vehicle issue, but we can do as roadway managers, as engineers, we can do some education. We can actually remove the objects above and beyond the standard. We can think about where the crashes are more likely to occur. We quote unquote go above the standard a little bit. We might need to think about enforcement. Okay. Yeah, we could make a wide clear zone, maybe around a corner. Okay. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of things we can think about doing that actually will help. So we think about what is the human factors problem more than anything else. Okay. Cool. Now, I'm not going to show you this particular one because it gives the answer away, but let me ask you, what is the most deadly fixed object? What's the most deadly fixed object? Yeah, yeah. Everybody got it. It's a tree. Okay. 45% of the fatal crashes occur when you hit a tree. We'll go and look at all of them here, but we also have to worry about overturning, people going in the opposite lane, a sharp corner at the end of a long straightaway. Focus on what you're seeing in terms of risk, and everybody's better off. But yeah, certainly trees and things like that are an issue that we can deal with. But think about other things too. Signs that aren't breakaway, guide rail systems that don't work, things like that. Okay? So, last poll question that we've got, and then we'll actually get you out of here a couple of minutes early. Okay? And I'll put that slide up here. Um, what does traffic safety mean to you? In the Q&A, tell me what traffic safety means. If you were going to define traffic safety, you're talking to somebody on the elevator and you say, I'm a traffic safety engineer. What does that mean? So in the Q&A, what does that mean? Making roadways as safe as possible, saving lives, safer roads and awareness, accident reduction, protect all people, creating safer roads, reducing injuries. Ooh, I like this one. Getting people home alive, getting everybody safer every single day. Trying to get closer to zero fatalities, keeping the public safe. Okay. The way I think about traffic safety is I want to set it up so that someone going down a roadway gets home safely every single day, and that one mistake doesn't lead to a serious crash or a fatality. Okay, which means I have to do more than just designing the roadway. I have to do more than just education. I have to do more than just enforcement. I have to think about the whole system, the redundancy, the idea of the Swiss cheese model. Okay, now, if you're still interested, I hope you are. We'd love to see you on additional webinars that we've got coming up. Uh, on Thursday, we're going to be doing a local federal aid 4-hour class. So if you're looking at federal aid, and then we've got our grants webinar and then a local road safety plan webinar coming up next week. And there are monies available to help solve the problems. We can't grant our way out of everything, but we can certainly get started. And with that, I am now going to show that last slide. And I thank you. The Q&A is open. If you got any last questions, you're welcome to throw it in. Let's see if we got any last questions here before we say and let everybody go. You're going to let me off the hook, Amanda and Jody. I'm trying to enjoy the city. I actually got to a museum yesterday. Got here a little early enough. I was able to see a museum I'd not seen before, the City Museum of New York. If you get a chance, it's on the upper side of the Central Park. But Central Park was very icy in spots. Okay, everybody. I'm going to head off to the New York Association of Towns meeting, and we're going to do a quiz with people. Yes, I'm throwing my infamous coasters at people. With that, thank you, everybody. And hopefully we'll see some of you on Thursday and next week. And take care, everybody. Bye-bye.